I'm back. It's been busy, but I'm glad we made time to do this week because it's race week in Imola. I like this track. It's old school, man. So it should be a good one. Um, Also excited about the fact that Kimi is going to be having his first Formula One Grand Prix at his hometown. So that's going to be an exciting one for Team Mercedes. I'm interested to see what he does with that, with the occasion, that is. And yeah, we go into this weekend also having settled the rear tire conspiracy theories surrounding McLaren. So hopefully we don't hear much of that throughout the whole weekend. I think we can put that to bed, really. The other teams are just gonna have to figure out how to do this. But not much of a factor here. Not a lot of tire wear at Imola. At least not as bad as some of the other tracks. But we'll chat about that. So yeah, let's go. So what are we looking at here in terms of track characteristics and some of the things that we're just going to have to pay attention to as we think about setting up a vehicle for this particular weekend? It's an anti-clockwise track with about 19 turns. I think about 9 of those are right-handers. And I really like the mix of corners that it has, right? So you've got technical chicanes, Variante Tamburella at turns 1 and 2, Variante Alta at 14 and 15. And then you've got that very slow hairpin at turn 7. And you've got 3 really fast sweepers, which make this track, like I said before, an old school track, right? It's a driver's track for all intents and purposes. And it also makes it quite demanding. And adding to that challenge is the fact that you've got some really significant elevation changes, right? So the uphill to Variante Alta and the downhill to Rivazza. That just adds to the intrigue. The asphalt is smooth, so it has been resurfaced and the bumps have been reduced, but it still places a heavy load on the tires and the brakes. We'll talk about those braking zones in a minute. But also something to think about is that in the middle of the day, the track temperature can exceed 50 degrees Celsius. In terms of the curbs and the runoffs, these are very high and very aggressive, particularly in the chicanes. Variante Alta will come to mind, and these can unsettle the car if they are taken too aggressively. Also, the runoff areas are quite short with some grass and gravel, depending on where you are on the track. So precision driving is going to be critical for this race as well. The high curves will increase the amount of mechanical stress on the suspension as well as the tires. So the setup here is just going to have to balance firmness and compliance. There's some heavy braking zones required at multiple points around the track, especially as you come into turn 2, the hairpin around turn 7, Rivazza as you come downhill into turn 16 and 17. Those are all going to be critical braking zones. And turn 17 is famously tricky because it's steep, it's blind, and it can lure drivers into braking too late. So the late drivers are just going to have to be very careful around there. There's only one DRS zone, and that's in the start-finish straight, so overtaking elsewhere is going to be difficult. The pit lane is incredibly long. It's about half a kilometer. This is going to be a one-stop race. I mean, it is a one-stop race by tradition, but anything can happen. We've seen that in the past races. But you're going to want to avoid unnecessary stops because you're going to lose 28 seconds in the pits. And so that's going to be a key consideration as teams also think around strategy and praying to their respective gods that nothing goes wrong, requiring additional stops. But that span in the works if it rains, as always. Okay, so now for the fun stuff. And we can start with aerodynamic configuration and what they're going to have to think about over there. So we are in a high downforce track, so teams are going to bring a medium to high downforce aero balance to the track this week. And what they want is enough wing to maximize cornering grip around the twisty and technical sectors of the track, but not so much drag that top speed suffers down that very long straight, because that's where You're going to do most of your your passing, I beg your pardon. And in terms of just balance and stability, you have to consider the long sweeping corners, so Piratella, Villeneuve, as well as the chicanes being Alta and Tamburello. So a stable platform is going to be crucial. And I feel like we say that every week, but I think it's especially true here. And you're also going to watch out for any understeer, particularly around the high-speed corners. That's going to cost you time. So I suspect, and I'm sure P1 has already gone by now, but any data coming around how they're doing around Minerali is going to be important just to see whether or not the drivers are experiencing any understeer and whether or not how much lap time that is costing them as a consequence. The main straight is quite long. So once again, you want to avoid excessive drag. But there's going to be an important compromise there. You might see them come with a moderate rear wing angle. So not as low as Monza, but not as high as some of the ultra high downforce circuits that we have on the calendar. As well as DRS efficiency is going to be very important on this track as well. Okay, moving on to the suspension and the mechanical setup. What we're going to try and contend with here are the very high and aggressive curbs that we have on this track, as well as the fast direction changes. And so we're going to need a very balanced suspension. And what that means is that it's going to have to be firm enough to remain stable under heavy braking, but also be able to be compliant enough in order to observe some of the impacts of the curves. So overly stiff setting, that's going to cause the car to bounce over Alta. While if it's too soft, you're going to experience excessive roll. Now, damping and bump is a way in which you can counter some of that. The dampers will be set to control the excessive roll, particularly under braking into Tamburello and into Rivazza, and also just to smooth out the impacts of those curbs as well as you go through the chicanes. Now, in terms of the bump settings, teams might go a little slightly softer here relative to those very smooth tracks that we have on the calendar, as well as what you would see there. And the objective there is just to prevent the car from bottoming out. But overall, damper settings will err on the side of stiffness or firmness, because you want immediate response from the vehicle as well, because the emphasis of this particular setup choice is stability when changing direction or when you're braking. Now, in terms of the brake bias, this is going to be a rearward bias in order to deal with the multiple braking zones that you have to contend with here: Tossa, Tamburello, Rivazza. And drivers are going to use trail braking, especially into Rivazza, to balance the car. And so effective brake cooling is also going to be a key feature of how they would want to set up the vehicle for this weekend in order to cope with the repeated heavy stops that you're going to have to. Okay, now to what is probably the least popular sections of these videos: camber and toe angles. We all remember what those were, right? So the front camber, you want a moderate negative camber there, and that is anything between -3 and -4 degrees, and that's because you want to maximize contact patch throughout the medium and fast corners. Imola does have very high lateral roads due to the fast direction changes around some of the corners like Villeneuve and Piratella, so it's going to reward front end grip. This track is going to reward front end grip, but teams are going to avoid excessive camber on this track, because that's going to overheat the inside shoulder. Rear camber, you want that less negative than what you have on the front camber, so you're thinking about -1 to -2 degrees there, and that's to stabilize the rear under power. So as you accelerate when you're exiting corner, especially through Rivazza exit and the main straight. Too little rear camber can cause a snap of oversteer, right? So you want to avoid that, but too much will reduce top speed stability, right? Toe settings, slight front toe in, that's going to aid with the turns into the hairpins and into the chicanes, while rear toe in, we're going to promote straight line stability. So what we were trying to avoid by having too much rear camber. Teams are going to optimize toe for stability on the run down to turn 2, and as they exit the hairpin around turn 7, right? So they're going to try and target that. Not a lot of exact values here because that varies quite a bit for this track depending on the chassis. But what the teams are going to want to emphasize is a neutral to slightly loose front end for agility, responsiveness, and a tighter rear for control, so stability as well. Again, responsiveness, trying to balance responsiveness with stability. So I thought we would have time to talk about tire strategy in a little bit more detail, but I soon realized that that's not necessary and it would make this video just unnecessarily long. Imola is traditionally a one-stop race because it is a low to medium tire demand track, and that pit stop is just way too long. You're going to lose too much time in the pits if you're going to try and push for a two-stop strategy. I think the only time we will see more than one stop is if there's a safety car or if it rains. Then we might see the cars coming in a couple more times. But traditionally, this is going to be a one-stop race, and I expect it to continue in that vein. So I thought maybe a good place to end this video in two parts would be driving styles and technique. The first thing I'd like to say around driving a style is Imola insists on two things: precision and courage. Brake precisely. If you brake too late or if you brake too early, you will be punished on the circuit. The second, you need to carry a lot of confidence into the high speed sections of this circuit in order to maximize performance. Here, you need maximum focus around the chicanes as well as around the blind corners in order to maximize the performance of the vehicle. There will be late braking, particularly at Tamburello and Rivaza. Ideally, you want to use trail braking into turn 17 so you can rotate the car as most efficiently as possible. But all in all, you need consistency in the heavy braking zone lap after lap in order to maintain tire temperature and to avoid flat spotting. I think we're going to see quite a few lockups on Sunday. Lastly but not least, maybe it's a good idea to talk a little bit about how the drivers might approach some of the key sections of this particular circuit. I think one of those key sections will be the hairpin, turn 7, Dossa. It is a heavy braking zone on entry, but what you can expect to see is that cars, and perhaps you've maybe seen that already as cars go around for P1 and P2 today, is that cars will try to hit the apex late because that gives you the best, if you brake precisely, it will give you the best opportunity to get a lot of traction going up that hill. Another key section is Villeneuve. I think that's turn 5 and 6, if I remember correctly, with a lot of rapid direction changes there. It needs smooth steering roll in order to get around there, and requires maximum confidence in the car's grip. So again, confidence is going to be key, particularly around that section. Minerali. I don't even say the first part of this corner's name because I don't know how to pronounce it. Throttle must be modulated carefully there. So you don't want to carry too much speed into the entry of turn 12. That's going to be important. Otherwise, you're going to carry that mistake that is inevitable throughout quite a bit of that track. Drivers will attack the curbs, but they will try to do so smoothly. They'll try to thread the needle through those chicanes in order to get maximum performance without bouncing the car towards the wall, because that's going to end badly. Strong exit out of Rivaza is going to be important. You're going to have to use the inside of that curb to set yourself up for the fastest straight. But the throttle, again, here you need to apply it progressively, particularly if the tires are a little bit on the cold side, and also to avoid any wheel spin. But the guys will prioritize trying to roll out of those corners quite cleanly rather than trying to scrub off some speed. Not much overtaking anywhere else on the track besides for that main straight. So I expect cars to struggle to overtake unless they can do so down the main straight. But other than that, it's going to be an interesting race, and I'll see you in the paddock.